Las Vegas is a ghost town, and this was no accident. The very magic it was built on, the myth of affordable buffets, the simple luxury of free parking, the endless flow of complimentary drinks, the promise that anyone, regardless of their bank account, could taste the life of a monarch for a fleeting weekend. But in the shadows, a sinister shift was underway. The wolves of Wall Street arrived. The sacred old rules were systematically dismantled, and faceless executives rubber-stamped decisions that would rip the very soul out of this city. In this video, you will witness the chilling confession of a retired casino executive, an insider who was in the room when those catastrophic choices were made. He confirms it was never a mistake. It was a cold, calculated design. From the insidious birth of resort fees to the calculated murder of the legendary $9.99 buffet, every single move was a premeditated strike. Every cherished tradition sacrificed on the altar of profit. And while Vegas still puts on its glittering mask, its heart has been brutally carved out. Was this the unavoidable destiny for America's playground? Or was it a sickening betrayal of the very people who built it? Do not look away, because the truth of what they did to Las Vegas is far more sinister than anyone is willing to admit. We must travel back in time to the Las Vegas Strip of a bygone era. Long before the plague of resort fees, the insult of parking charges, and the outrage of overpriced drinks became the new grim reality. Back then, Vegas was an oasis engineered to anoint you as royalty the second your feet hit the pavement. It was utterly irrelevant whether you clutched a few $100s or a king's ransom. The very genetic code of the Strip was alchemy, transforming the mundane into the magnificent. The neon glow seemed to burn with more life. The smiles from the dealers felt genuine, and the casinos operated on a radical principle. They gave more than they plundered. At least, that was the grand illusion they sold. A guest could enter a casino with a mere $200 and, by dawn, stride out with the swagger of Sinatra himself. This was no happy accident. The old guard, the original architects of this fantasy, understood a fundamental truth that the new Wall Street overlords would never grasp. If you make people feel priceless, they will spend as if they are. The strategy was devastatingly simple, yet brilliant. Seduce them with a steak dinner for pennies. Keep the drinks flowing freely all night long, and gift them a room even at a small loss. This was never about bleeding the guest dry, nickel by agonizing dime. It was about forging an intoxicating atmosphere where every visitor was the most important person in the world. This is precisely why the classic Vegas buffet ascended to the stuff of legend. For under $10, you could construct a mountain on your plate with prime rib, snow crab legs, and a parade of desserts that defied reality. It was an open secret that the house took a small loss on the food, but that calculated loss was a pittance compared to the fortunes patrons would willingly surrender at the tables, feed into the slots, or spend at the bar, once they were full, content, and utterly captivated. For families, for the everyday traveler, this formula was an irresistible siren's call. Vegas wasn't some exclusive club for the wealthy elite or the hopelessly reckless gambler. It was a democratic playground, a sanctuary where the middle class could shed their reality for 48 glorious hours. You didn't need to be a high roller to be treated with dignity. That very sense of belonging, that was the source of the Strip's true magic. The city throbbed with a vibrant human pulse. Throngs of tourists choked the sidewalks, their laughter echoing in the notoriously long buffet lines, the clinking of glasses a constant symphony in the hazy lounges. Every dollar spent was an investment that paid dividends in pure energy, as the sheer electricity of the crowd became a self-perpetuating force. The elation of one group would infect the next, and soon, the entire Strip vibrated with a raw, untamable power that no corporate spreadsheet could ever quantify or comprehend. People spoke of Vegas not as a city, but as another dimension. A construction worker from Ohio, a nurse from Texas, a young couple from California. They could all descend upon the city on a Friday night, and by Saturday morning, they were reborn, living the life of superstars. The secret ingredient? It was generosity. The casinos offered a taste of the good life, Free parking, complimentary shows, impossibly cheap food. And in return, the guests gave back everything, and more. It was a sacred pact, a cycle of perceived value and earned trust. And for decades, it was an unbreakable, flawless machine. This was the Vegas that forged legends, the Vegas that commanded a loyalty so profound that generations of families made their pilgrimage year after year. Fathers initiated their sons. Weekend getaways for friends solidified into unbreakable, lifelong traditions. And a tide of tourists from every corner of the globe flooded in, desperate to experience a phenomenon that existed nowhere else on Earth. You see, the city was selling something far more potent than mere games of chance. It was selling the intoxicating feeling that you mattered, that you belonged, that for one fleeting, incandescent weekend, the entire universe revolved around you. But the clock was ticking. And as the years marched on, that entire model of generosity found itself in the crosshairs. To a new breed of predator, it looked antiquated, inefficient, downright foolish. Why ever lose money on a steak dinner when you could gouge them for triple the price? Why on earth would you give away parking when you could weaponize it into another relentless revenue stream? These were not the questions of the Vegas Old Guard. No, these were the whispers of the invaders, the outsiders. The vultures descended. The financiers, the consultants, the soulless men with their charts and projections who saw no atmosphere, only algorithms. And with horrifying speed, the very foundations of Old Vegas began to splinter. The cracks became chasms when Wall Street, that insatiable beast, finally cast its predatory gaze upon the desert. Hedge funds, private equity ghouls, and faceless corporate boards began their hostile takeover of the casinos that once thrived on raw instinct, sacred tradition, and pure gut feeling. Suddenly, the old guard, the Vegas originals who championed cheap buffets and the sacred right of free parking, found themselves ambushed by an army of suits, armed not with vision, but with charts, spreadsheets, and cold projections. The very soul of Vegas was being rewritten. Its language twisted from fun and experience to the cold, sterile dialect of revenue per square foot, profit margins per customer, and quarterly growth. For the first time, a terrifying truth emerged. The Strip was no longer a city built on wild dreams. It had been degraded into a mere business asset, a lemon to be squeezed until nothing but the bitter rind remained. And it all began with a deceptively simple, venomous pitch. Resort fees. Imagine the scene. A consultant, a harbinger of doom, strides into a boardroom with a presentation that promised millions in blood money. The idea was, at first, utterly profane. To dare charge guests an extra $25 a night for services that had always been an unspoken promise, a part of the welcome. Many of the old guard recoiled, predicting outrage, a full-scale revolt. But the corporate masters insisted on their cynical experiment. And then, the unthinkable happened. The guests, with barely a whimper, paid. The floodgates of corporate greed burst open. One property capitulated, then another, and in a sickeningly short time, every last casino on the Strip was levying these parasitic resort fees. What was once an outrageous betrayal became the grim new normal. And that same predatory logic soon set its sights on parking. Free parking, a tradition held sacred in Las Vegas for decades. A tradition as ancient and iconic as the neon lights themselves. The old-timers cried out, warning it would be suicide to desecrate that pact, that the city was built on convenience, on generosity, and on a spirit of openness. But Wall Street's logic was a frozen, calculating thing. A single PowerPoint slide projected tens of millions in plundered annual revenue if drivers were charged for this basic right. The test was deployed, and once again, the people grumbled, but they paid. By the following year, the entire Strip had fallen in line. The numbers on the spreadsheets looked good, but the very soul of Vegas grew dimmer, its light flickering ever more faintly. Food and drink were the next to be sacrificed on the altar of profit. the legendary $9.99 buffet, once the beating heart of Vegas hospitality, became a target for demolition. The corporate rationale was brutally simple. Why lose a single cent on food when you can weaponize it into another profit center? Prices didn't just rise, they exploded, doubling, then tripling. The drinks that once flowed freely as you gambled now carried a price tag of $20, then a staggering $30. Every single item that had once been a gesture of welcome was cynically repackaged and monetized as just another line item on a balance sheet. The sacred Vegas covenant of give a little to get a lot was systematically dismantled and replaced by a new vicious creed. Take as much as you possibly can and then keep taking. Some of the old guard fought back, but their resistance was futile and came at a terrible price. Those who dared to stand in the way of this new corporate steamroller were swiftly, mercilessly replaced. The message was clear: adapt or be exiled. That was the chilling ultimatum. And tragically, many, including the retired casino executive whose testimony haunts this story, admit they signed off on the very changes they knew would murder the magic. Their confession is a gut punch. If I didn't play their game, I'd have been replaced in a heartbeat by someone who would. What made this corporate conquest so insidious was how the public enabled it. Every single time a new parasitic fee or a shocking price hike was unleashed, there was a predictable storm of anger, a flood of complaints, even screaming headlines about the death of Vegas. But then, the guests still came. They cursed under their breath as they pulled out their credit cards, but they still paid the ransom. That compliant behavior sent a catastrophic signal back to the gleeful boardrooms. It told them the limits could always be pushed further. If the public, the lifeblood, kept showing up no matter the abuse, there was absolutely no incentive to ever stop the bleeding. What had been a dazzling playground for the middle class was warped into a disorienting maze of hidden charges, suffocating restrictions, and outrageously high-priced options. Guests no longer felt like royalty, they felt like marks, suckers in a rigged game where the house always won. Not just at the card tables, but in every single predatory corner of their stay. A weekend escape to Vegas devolved into a grim series of calculated transactions, each one meticulously designed to bleed just a little more from your wallet. The magic wasn't extinguished in a single flash. It was systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece, one soulless decision at a time. By the time this monstrous transformation was complete, the Strip had crossed a dark threshold from which it could never return. Vegas was no longer a city built on the dream of giving to the guest. It had become a city built on pure, unadulterated taking, and the old guard watched in horror, knowing exactly what was lost. They issued dire warnings that this model was unsustainable, that the very soul of Vegas, the everyday people, the families, the groups of friends pooling their hard-earned money for one weekend of glorious escape, would eventually be driven away for good. But Wall Street was deaf to their pleas. The charts showed relentless growth. The profits poured in like a flood, and as long as the numbers on the screen stayed green, this brutal cultural desecration was hailed as a resounding success. Behind the hypnotic neon glow, Vegas had entered its darkest era. A soulless new world where loyalty, atmosphere, and the very magic of the place were sacrificed at the altar of quarterly targets. And in a moment of chilling honesty, the retired executive confessed the awful truth. That was the sickening realization. The Strip he loved was dead and never coming back. You see, the old Strip, it thrived on a chaotic, beautiful volume of people. In those bygone days, success wasn't a spreadsheet. It was measured in heads on pillows and the deafening electric buzz of casino floors packed shoulder to shoulder. It was a glorious mess. And who cared if half the players were just feeding nickel slots or lining up for the cheap buffets? The sheer mass of humanity generated a raw, palpable energy, a thunderous noise, and an unstoppable momentum. That energy was a contagion, a fever that infected everyone and made them open their wallets. But then, the vultures from Wall Street descended, reshaping the Strip in their own sterile image, and that sacred formula was brutally flipped on its head. The new cynical strategy wasn't about filling every room and every table. It was about attracting fewer guests, but infinitely richer ones. The cold, hard numbers told a seductive, dangerous story. Why bother with 100 people spending a mere $200 each when you could lure in 40 high rollers, each bleeding 600? On paper, the math was a siren's call. And just like that, the new corporate doctrine was carved in stone. Hike the room rates, jack up the minimum bets, gouge them on the drinks, and bleed them dry with 1,000 hidden fees. Suddenly, with fewer people to manage, operating costs plummeted while profits held steady or even soared. To the detached investors and soulless board members, it was a financial paradise. But for the soul of the Strip itself, it was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts. The intoxicating atmosphere of Vegas was never supposed to be about profit margins. It was always about the crowd. It was the tourist from the Midwest, wide-eyed and dreaming. It was the wild bachelor parties pouring in from California, the sprawling families from Texas, the hopeful retirees from Florida, and the endless stream of international visitors, all crushed together, creating a single, living, breathing heartbeat. When the sidewalks were an impassable river of people, when the casino floors erupted with cheers and delirious laughter, the Strip was truly alive. That was the drug. That's what kept them crawling back. It was never just about the jackpot. It was about the raw electricity of being submerged in a sea of thousands, all chasing that same impossible thrill. But when the great culling began, when the shift to fewer, richer guests took hold, that magnificent heartbeat grew faint, almost silent. You could walk the Strip on a weekday and feel the gaping, hollow emptiness. The lights still blazed, but without the teeming masses to reflect in, they felt like lights in a graveyard. The high roller became the only prize worth hunting. Forget courting the middle-class traveler with cheap buffets and a comped room. The casinos now groveled for international whales, predators willing to torch tens of thousands of dollars in a single weekend. And for them, the exclusive clubs materialized, along with the palatial suites and the cloistered private gaming rooms, all of it replacing the democratic, affordable perks of a bygone era. To fill the void, they courted the convention crowd and the corporate drones, bringing with them a steady, predictable river of expense accounts and guaranteed spending. And on paper, the damn thing worked. Revenue stayed high even as the sidewalks emptied. But the devastating cost was that the Strip no longer belonged to everyone. It belonged to the select, privileged few. And here's the fatal flaw in their brilliant plan, as the executive grimly admitted. High rollers are a fickle, faithless breed. They can be poached and lured away to Macau, to Singapore, to Monte Carlo at the drop of a hat. The second a better deal appears, the moment the perks get flashier, or if some other destination just feels newer, they are gone. And all the while, the middle class, the very backbone that held Vegas upright for decades, was being driven away in droves. Once you price them out, once you insult them, they don't come back. They woke up and realized they could spend a fraction of the money for a far better experience somewhere else. And with every family that vanished, with every group of friends that chose Mexico over Nevada, Vegas wasn't just losing customers, it was hemorrhaging the very soul that made it unique. Step inside the casinos and the change was gut-wrenching. In the old days, a man could drop $200 at the slots and still walk out with a smile. Because he'd been plied with free drinks, treated to a cheap steak dinner, maybe even handed the keys to a comped room. He felt valued. He felt seen. But in this New Vegas, that same man loses his $200. And on top of that, he's slugged for parking, forced to swallow a $50 buffet, and fleeced for $25 for a pathetic, watered-down cocktail. What was once fun money now felt like being mugged in broad daylight. And that corrosive bitterness ate away at the trust, the raw excitement that had once set Vegas apart from every other place on Earth. And so, the Strip grew quieter. The glorious, chaotic buzz of the crowds faded into the sterile, polite hush of the high-limit rooms. Where tourists once erupted in triumph over the smallest of wins, now the floors were stalked by silent, guarded players, their faces grim, their eyes locked on screens. The laughter, the beautiful chaos, the glorious, reckless abandon of the old Vegas nights. All of it gone. And as it vanished, the city's very identity slipped away with it. The retired executive recalled the exact moment with haunting clarity. He stood there one evening, gazing out over the casino floor, and a terrible realization washed over him. While the profits were holding, something vital, something invisible, had died. The energy had been bled out. Vegas was surviving on the balance sheets, but spiritually, it was running on fumes. What the suits on Wall Street hailed as efficiency was, to him, nothing but a hollow, tragic victory. He confessed the cold, hard truth. They were butchering the golden goose. And once you've crossed that Rubicon, there's no retreat. But the true tragedy, the gut-wrenching part of old Vegas's downfall, was how it was a grotesque reflection of a sickness spreading across America. The agonizing, slow execution of the middle class. For generations, Las Vegas wasn't for the elite. It was the sacred playground of the common man. A steelworker from Ohio, a schoolteacher from Kansas, or a nurse from Texas could snatch a cheap flight, snag a bargain room, and for one glorious, shimmering weekend, taste the life of a king. No, Vegas was never meant for the ivory tower crowd. It was the one place where hardworking people could shed their 9-to-5 skin and feel something truly magnificent. But then, the wolves of Wall Street descended upon the Strip, and that sacred promise was auctioned off, one betrayal at a time. It wasn't a sudden cataclysm. No cabal of suits in a boardroom explicitly declared war on the American dream. Oh no, it was far more sinister than that. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. A $25 resort fee here, a $50 buffet there, cocktails that mysteriously leaped from $10 to $25, and parking that went from a welcome gift to a $30 shakedown, seemingly overnight. Individually, each parasitic charge was disguised as small, justifiable, maybe even harmless. But stacked one on top of the other, they built an insurmountable wall, locking ordinary families out of their own kingdom. That weekend escape that once cost a manageable $500 now demanded 2 or even 3 times that ransom. For millions, the city that felt like a birthright had become a foreign land, completely out of reach. The retired executive confessed, his voice heavy with regret, that by the time the sheer scale of the devastation became clear, the point of no return had long passed. The middle-class families were gone, and they weren't coming back. They had already moved on, finding new havens. Why bleed thousands of dollars in Vegas when you could get a king's welcome in Mexico, cruise the turquoise Caribbean, or simply find joy closer to home? The Strip had committed the ultimate sin. It had betrayed its own people. And once that trust is shattered, loyalty becomes a ghost, impossible to recapture. The very executives who deluded themselves into thinking they were safeguarding profits had, in their greed, torched the one bridge that connected Vegas to its soul. In its place, a new, dangerous obsession took hold. The high rollers. But here's the fatal flaw in that strategy. High rollers have no allegiance. They are mercenaries of luxury, chasing perks and status to whichever corner of the globe offers the most. Today, they might grace Vegas with their presence, but tomorrow, the siren call of Macau, Singapore, or Monte Carlo could easily lure them away. By groveling at the feet of the global elite, the Strip had traded its bedrock foundation for a house of cards in a hurricane. The middle class was the city's very lifeblood, a steady pulse of loyalty returning year after year, generation after generation. The high rollers? They were phantoms, nothing more than fleeting shadows in the neon glare. And deep down, the executives knew it. But this sickness wasn't confined to Vegas. It was a symptom of America's creeping disease. Airlines nickel and diming you for bags, for the privilege of a seat. Sports tickets priced for oligarchs? Hotels demanding payment for Wi-Fi and basic comforts that were once a given? The everyday person was being bled dry, squeezed from every conceivable angle. And Vegas? Vegas became the roaring amplifier for that nationwide shakedown. The Strip morphed into a glaring neon symbol of the nation's new cruel creed. Profits above all. People be damned. The resulting void, the sheer loss of energy, is a palpable cancer. Walk the Strip today and you can feel it in your bones. Sure, the casinos are gleaming, the lights still blinding, and the shows are still spectacular, but that electric hum of pure, unadulterated excitement, the roar of a crowd buzzing with dreams and possibility, it's gone. Vanished. Without the river of middle-class humanity flooding the sidewalks, without the glorious noise and joyful chaos of budget travelers and families, the Strip feels like a sterile, high-end shopping mall, not a playground for the people. Profitable? Absolutely. But utterly, completely soulless. And the irony? Oh, the irony is a dagger to the heart. The very people who built this desert oasis, the hardworking tourists who poured their dreams and dollars into it year after year, the faithful middle-class dreamers who forged the Vegas legend, they are the very ones who have been cast out. In its blind obsession with quarterly reports, the Strip has severed its own roots. The retired executive confessed he watched the decay unfold in real time. He saw guests who once shrugged off a loss with a smile now storming out, their faces twisted with rage, feeling utterly fleeced. He saw employees who once built lives on the tips of happy patrons now staring at slashed hours as the once mighty crowds dwindled to a trickle. A city once legendary for its generosity had become a monument to pure, unadulterated greed. For him, that dawning horror was a crushing weight. He admitted to the sickening feeling of complicity, of stamping his signature on the very policies he knew were gutting the city's soul. And while the money kept rolling in, for a time, the catastrophic long-term cost was undeniable. Vegas had turned its back on the very people who had breathed life into it. And in that ultimate act of betrayal, it forfeited the very soul that made it a global phenomenon. The Strip was still breathing, a glittering corpse. But the heart of Vegas, that beautiful, audacious middle-class dream, was already cold and dead. For the retired casino executive, the crushing weight of those decisions became a ghost that would never leave him. Staring into the camera's unblinking eye, he laid the terrible truth bare. Yes, he admitted, I was complicit. He was the one who signed off on the very policies that sold this city's soul for profit, that swapped community for cold, hard quarterly reports. He could have put up a fight. He could have raised his voice, but he stayed silent. Why? Because in that cutthroat world, to resist is to be replaced. If I hadn't done it, they'd have just found someone else who would, he admitted, a pathetic excuse for his complicity. And while that flimsy justification might protect him in a boardroom, it offers no shield from the crushing weight of his guilt. The Strip was gutted on his watch, and he now carries the unbearable burden of his part in its downfall. He then revealed the real reason he walked away early. It wasn't fatigue or a lack of interest. It was a profound, soul-crushing disillusionment. Year after year, he watched the meetings become more soulless, more robotic. The talk was no longer about crafting magical experiences or earning loyalty. It was all about squeezing every last cent from the margins, slashing costs, and devising predatory new schemes to bleed every dollar from the guests. The sheer joy of creating unforgettable moments had been systematically replaced by the cold, dead eyes of spreadsheets and profit projections. I refuse to spend the rest of my life bleeding people dry and calling it progress, he declared. And so he walked, not as a hero trying to save Vegas, but in a desperate act to save what was left of his own soul. Yet, beneath the layers of regret, you could still hear a profound love for the city. He spoke of the Strip like a man mourning a dear friend who had been utterly corrupted. He still clung to a belief in what Vegas could be, in its unparalleled power to dazzle and delight. but he had lost all faith in the monstrous corporate machine that now held it in a death grip. Vegas isn't dead, he insisted, almost pleading. But the Vegas I loved, it's being erased before our very eyes. For him, walking away was his one small act of defiance. A desperate cry that enough was enough. He knew he couldn't turn back the corporate tide, but he could damn well refuse to be one of the sharks in the water. And looking to the future, he offered a chilling prophecy. This reckless strategy of catering only to the super rich might look good on paper now, but it's a house of cards. The high rollers have no loyalty. They are global mercenaries, flitting from one opulent playground to the next, always hunting for a better deal. The second, Macau, Singapore, or Monte Carlo dangles a shinier jewel, these so-called whales will abandon Vegas without a second thought, vanishing overnight. And once you've driven out the middle class, the city's very lifeblood, you can't just snap your fingers and win them back. He warned that the Strip is teetering on the brink of a precipice, foolishly gambling its entire future for the sake of immediate profits. But even then, he left a sliver of hope. He believes that if, just if, someone with actual courage finally steps up to reverse this disastrous course, to restore real value, to welcome back the middle class, and to remember the simple truth that generosity builds loyalty, then maybe, just maybe, Vegas could find its soul again. After all, this city was built on reinvention, and that spirit might be its only salvation. Without the regular folks, he stressed, without the very people who gave this city its pulse, Vegas just ain't Vegas, he said, his voice thick with conviction. That was the one undeniable truth he clung to. The interview concluded with a somber reflection, one that mirrored the chilling thoughts of everyone listening. This executive wasn't some cartoon villain. He was a gear in the monstrous machine. His confession was so powerful precisely because he owned his complicity, his failures. This was never a story about one man. It was an indictment of an entire corporate culture, a broken system that values mindless growth over human beings and raw profit over genuine experience. And while Vegas still puts on a glittering show, beneath that neon facade, a city is at war with its own soul. A city that has auctioned off its magic for a handful of silver. In the end, this man's story wasn't a confession. It was a dire warning, a terrifying warning that if Vegas stays on this destructive path, the Strip might remain profitable, but it will be utterly hollow, a beautiful, glittering corpse with no soul. He still loves this city, and like countless others who remember its glory days, he clings to the faint hope that the magic might one day return. But for now, his verdict was crushingly final. The Vegas he knew, the Vegas that belonged to everyone, is dead and gone. And unless a revolution happens, it's never coming back. Sure, Las Vegas still glows with those iconic neon lights, but the reality flickering behind that glow is a darkness most visitors could never imagine. This strip was once built on an incredible promise of generosity, a place where ordinary people could feel like royalty, if only for a weekend. Today, it has been twisted into a machine engineered to extract, not to give, to profit, not to enchant. The chilling confession from a man who spent 14 years inside the belly of the beast only validates the sickening feeling so many of us have had walking down those ghostly, empty sidewalks. This is not the same city. It has ceased to be the people's playground and has become the exclusive domain of the ultra-wealthy. And yet, even in the face of this betrayal, a flicker of hope remains. Vegas has always been a city of miraculous reinvention, a place with the grit to rise from its own ashes and return even stronger. The terrifying question is whether anyone in power has the courage to reclaim that magic for ordinary people, or if the strip is doomed to continue down this soulless path, trading its very soul for a spreadsheet. The final verdict falls to you. Is Las Vegas truly a lost cause, condemned by its own greed? Or can its soul still be salvaged from the abyss? Your testimony is demanded in the comments below. And if you possess the courage to stare into the rot festering behind the neon facade, to hear the damning truths they tried to bury, then you must subscribe and stand with us The chronicle of this city's downfall is far from over, and the next chapter promises a descent into even greater darkness.